The auction stage the room was loud and full of smoke. Lights flashed in strange colors, and voices shouted over each other. It was an alien auction house, hidden deep inside a black market station on the edge of the galaxy. Creatures of all shapes and sizes filled the room, bidding for items like weapons, jewels, and living beings. And that night, one of the special items was a living being, a female alien painted in glowing colors. She stood on the stage, her body covered in blue and gold paint, designed to make her look like a doll. Chains hung from her wrists, and her eyes were full of fear. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared down at the floor. The auctioneer shouted loudly. A rare breeder from the fallen planet Zenthara, still young, still useful, comes with 2 younglings hidden in her sack. But don't worry, they won't be a problem. The crowd laughed cruelly. Cheering and clapping in the back corner stood a human man named Jaren. He wasn't laughing. He had just arrived at the station for fuel and food, but something had drawn him to this place. Now his eyes were fixed on the painted alien girl standing on the stage. She looked so tired. Her legs shaking, her arms thin. But even under the paint, Jaren could see her true face, soft, scared, and full of pain. She looked like someone who had lost everything, and somehow Jaren felt a pull in his heart. A strange need to help her. The bidding began. 50 credits. Shouted a lizard-faced buyer. 80. Yelled another with metal arms. The auctioneer grinned and called, "Who will give me 100 for this beautiful, broken toy?" Before Jaren could think, his hand went up. 150. He called out. The room went silent for a moment. All eyes turned to him. A lone human among aliens. Someone laughed. "He wants to play hero." Another said, "Humans are soft, always falling for pretty pets." But Jaren didn't care. He walked forward, eyes still on the girl, sold to the human. The auctioneer shouted, slamming his hand down. Chains were unlocked, and 2 guards pushed the girl toward him. She didn't fight, didn't cry. She just stared at the floor, as if waiting for more pain. Jaren took off his coat and wrapped it around her gently. Her body flinched like she expected a strike, but nothing came. He leaned down and whispered, "You're safe now." The crowd didn't like that. They started booing, yelling that he was weak, that she was worthless. Throw her back, human. Someone shouted, "She's already used and broken." Screamed another. Jaren said nothing, only held the girl's arm gently and walked out of the auction house. As they moved through the dirty streets of the space station, she didn't speak. She walked beside him quietly, holding the coat tight at one point. She looked over her shoulder, checking the small cloth sack she had carried with her. Jaren saw something move inside. Very small. He didn't ask, just kept walking. They reached his small ship parked outside the station. He opened the door and led her inside. It was simple. A cargo ship turned into a home. 1 bedroom, 1 kitchen, 1 storage room. He pointed to the seat. "You can rest here." She didn't sit, just stood still. Watching him with wide, confused eyes, Jaren walked to the food unit and warmed a meal. He placed it on the table and sat down across from her. She still didn't move, so he gently pushed the plate toward her. "Eat," he said softly. She sat slowly, hands shaking, and picked up the food. As she ate, Jaren noticed her looking around carefully. Like a creature trapped in a hunter's den, he didn't blame her, where she came from. Trust probably meant death. He said nothing more that night. Just let her eat, drink, and rest. Later, when she fell asleep in the corner chair with the coat still wrapped around her, Jaren sat across the room, watching her quietly. He didn't know who she really was or what had happened to her. But he knew one thing. She wasn't a toy. She wasn't a thing to be sold and used. And whatever it took, he was going to protect her. Outside, the stars moved across the black sky, but inside that small ship, something new had begun, a strange quiet bond between a broken alien mother and a human who refused to let her be broken any longer. And neither of them knew yet. This was only the beginning. Asterisk, the ship's engines hummed softly as it drifted away from the black market station. Jaren sat in the pilot's seat, hands on the controls, but his mind was somewhere else. In the corner of the ship, wrapped in his jacket, the alien girl slept. With her knees to her chest, beside her, the small cloth sack lay quietly, unmoving. He didn't ask questions. He didn't touch her. He only watched from a distance, trying to understand what he had just done. He had bought someone, but not like the others did. Not for fun, not for profit. He had bought her to give her something she hadn't had in a long time: safety. The ship entered a quiet zone. No patrols, no scanners, no signals. Jaren always came here to hide, to rest, to escape. Now, it was her turn to escape too. She woke hours later, startled. Like someone waking up from a nightmare. She looked around quickly, eyes wild, breathing heavy. Jaren raised both hands and stayed seated. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're on my ship. You're safe." She stared at him without replying. Then slowly reached for the sack, opening it with shaking fingers. Two tiny figures peeked out. Alien children, small, skinny, with wide, glowing eyes. They looked scared and silent. Clinging to their mother's arms, Jaren's heart broke. He had expected smuggled goods or personal things inside that sack. Not children, not two little lives hiding in fear. "I didn't know," he whispered. The alien girl didn't respond. She pulled the children closer and wrapped herself around them like a shield. Jaren stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen panel. He made 3 bowls of warm broth and placed them on the floor near her. Then he backed away and returned to his chair. No commands, no force, no loud words, only silence and space to breathe. The children looked at the food, unsure. One of them sniffed it, then took a slow sip. The other followed. Their mother finally lifted the 3rd bowl and tasted it herself. That was the first time she looked at Jaren without fear, just for a second, but it was enough that night. Jaren didn't sleep. He sat near the engine room, listening to every sound, the soft slurps of soup, the quiet whispers in a strange tongue. The way the children laughed once, just once, when their mother tickled their fingers. In the morning, Jaren had an idea. He opened a storage room that used to carry tools and turned it into a small space with blankets and cushions. He painted a few stars on the wall with old glow ink. It wasn't much, but it looked like a room, not a cage. He knocked gently on the wall near her corner and stepped back. She came out slowly, watching him with suspicion. He pointed to the new room. "For them," he said, "a place to sleep." The children peeked from behind her legs, staring at the glowing stars. And then, to his surprise, they ran into the room and began laughing, touching the walls, jumping on the blankets. The alien girl looked at them, then looked at Jaren for the first time. Her lips moved. "Sira," she said softly. Placing her hand on her chest, Jaren blinked. "Zira." He repeated. She nodded. That was her name. That was the start over the next few days. Things changed little by little. Zira still spoke rarely. But she didn't flinch when Jaren entered the room. She took food for her children. And sometimes for herself. She began cleaning her children's faces with care, brushing their soft hair gently. She looked less afraid, less broken. Jaren tried to learn her language, using hand signals and simple drawings. She taught him a few words: water, sleep, danger, mother. Her children called him Hum, their word for human, and when they laughed, Jaren felt something warm rise in his chest. But not everything was safe. One evening, Jaren noticed blinking lights on his ship's console. A scanner had tried to lock on their position. It came from the black market station. Someone was tracking them. He didn't tell Zero yet. He didn't want her to panic. Instead, He increased the ship's stealth field and changed their path toward a hidden moon. A forest world where no scanners worked. He had stayed there once. Long ago, it was quiet and hard to find. Zero noticed the shift. Of course, she asked with her eyes. But Jaren only said, "We need to hide." She nodded. No questions, just quiet understanding. That night, the ship floated above a sea of clouds, heading toward a place where monsters didn't look like monsters. They looked like buyers. Dealers, owners, and one human who bought a painted slave but never saw her as one. Zero sat beside her sleeping children and looked out the window. She watched the stars and whispered one word to herself. In her forgotten tongue, hope and... Far behind them, in a room full of fire and lies, someone realized the girl was gone and put a price on her return. The stars outside Jaren's ship blinked like cold, watchful eyes, but inside, it was warm and quiet. Zira sat with her children near the soft glow of the heater. Brushing their hair with her fingers, she had started to hum a soft tune from her world, a lullaby meant to chase away fear. It was the first time Jaren saw her smile. A real, small, peaceful smile. But peace doesn't last in the shadows of the galaxy. Not when someone puts a price on your head. That night, Jaren checked the ship system and froze. A signal was bouncing off their hull. Thin, hidden, but there, a silent tracker. Probably slipped onto his ship back at the auction house. Someone had been following them the whole time. He didn't tell Zero right away. She had just started to feel safe, and he didn't want to take that away. Instead, he quietly changed. The ship's heading, turning sharply toward the forest moon. If they could make it there, they'd be invisible for a while, but he was too late. A red light flashed on the control panel, followed by a soft alarm. 3 small ships had entered. Scanning range, fast and armed, bounty hunters. Jaren grabbed his blaster and ran to the back room. Zira, hide, take the kids. Get in the storage hatch. Now, she saw his face. No panic, just firm urgency, without a word. She lifted her sleepy children and crawled into the hidden compartment. Beneath the floor, Jaren locked the hatch and turned around just in time. The ship shook as magnetic clamps latched onto the hull. Then came the knock. Not a polite one, a hard, heavy bang on the outer door. Jaren opened it slowly, pretending to yawn like someone just waking up. 3 figures stood there, weapons ready, grins wide. "Nice ship you got, human," the leader said. Her eyes narrow and cruel. "Mind if we come in?" Jaren stepped aside, keeping his hands in view. "I'm just a cargo runner. Nothing special here." They walked in, scanning the room. Checking every corner, the leader turned and smiled. "You were at the auction, weren't you? Bought yourself a breeder." Jaren shrugged. "Didn't keep her. She cried too much. I dropped her off on the mining colony." The hunters exchanged glances. "We heard different," one of them said, tapping his helmet. "We got a heat signature. 3 bodies, small ones too." That's when Jaren's lie started to fall apart. One of the children inside the hatch sneezed. Tiny, soft, but loud in the silence. The leader's smile vanished. She raised her weapon, found them, before she could pull the trigger. Jaren moved. He wasn't military, but he had been in enough bar fights to know how to throw a punch. His blaster fired once, hitting the nearest bounty hunter in the leg. Chaos exploded. Zira heard the noise above and knew. She kissed her children's foreheads and whispered something in her language. Then she opened the hatch and climbed out. Her eyes burned with fire, not fear. She grabbed a heavy metal pipe from the wall and moved without hesitation. One of the hunters turned just in time to see her coming. She swung the pipe hard, knocking him to the floor. Jaren looked up in shock as she took down the second hunter with one smooth strike. Only the leader remained. She raised her gun at Zira. "Back off, alien trash." She hissed, but Jaren shot first, his blast knocking the weapon out of her hand. Zero didn't stop. She tackled the leader, roaring in a voice Jaren had never heard before. The sound shook the ship walls. Not a scream, but a war cry. When it was over, all 3 hunters lay tied up in the corner, groaning and unconscious. Zero breathed hard, chest rising and falling, her hands shaking from adrenaline. Jaren stared at her. Not with fear, but with something close to awe. "You fought," he said quietly. Zero looked down. Then at her children, watching from the hatch. She nodded slowly. For them, Jaren touched his chest. "You saved me too." She didn't reply, but her eyes said everything. They couldn't stay here now, not after this. Jaren quickly disconnected the magnetic clamps, dumped the bounty hunters outside into space in an emergency pod, and set the ship moving again. This time, straight into the forest moon's atmosphere, a place full of danger. Yes, but one thing the bounty hunters wouldn't dare enter. They didn't speak much during the descent. Zero sat with her children, arms around them. Jaren sat at the controls. But his mind was full of questions. What kind of power had awakened in her when she fought? Who was she really? Outside, the green clouds of the forest world swirled like a warning. But Jaren smiled to himself, because even with bounty hunters behind them and danger ahead, he didn't feel afraid anymore. He wasn't alone. She wasn't broken, and together they were becoming something stronger than either had ever been. The ship landed with a soft thud, surrounded by thick mist and giant twisted trees. This was the forest moon called Varnic 7, a place feared by traders and bounty hunters. Locals called it the Forest of Ghosts, a place where machines stopped working, a place where people heard voices that weren't there. Jaren had only come here once. Years ago, he remembered the silence, the strange shapes between trees, the way the forest watched you. Now, he had no choice but to return. The bounty hunters would never follow them here. Even they were too scared. Zero stood near the hatch, holding both children by their hands. Their eyes were wide, but not with fear, with wonder. Blue vines glowed along the forest floor, and soft white lights floated like fireflies in the air. The trees seemed alive, their bark pulsing gently. Jaren stepped out first, checking his scanner. But as expected, it blinked and died. "No tech," he muttered. "Everything dies here." Zero followed slowly, her feet bare, feeling the ground. She said something in her language, a single word, soft and full of memory. Jaren looked at her. "You know this place?" She nodded once. "Old world." Before war, they walked deeper into the woods, away from the ship. Branches moved as if they were reaching out, but never touched. Bird-like creatures flew above without sound, and sometimes from the corner of their eyes. They saw shapes, tall, shadowy, and watching. They found a small cave behind a curtain of moss, dry, hidden, and protected from above. Jaren set up blankets and food packs, while Zero gathered leaves and sticks. The children made little nests from vines, laughing and chasing glowing bugs. For the first time in many nights, they had peace. That evening, Zero sat beside Jaren at the cave's mouth. The children slept behind them, safe and warm. Jaren looked at the stars through the tree gaps. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked. Zero didn't answer right away. Then she spoke, slowly, in broken English. "No more world, only memory." Jaren nodded, understanding more than her words. She didn't just lose her home. She lost a part of herself, the world she once knew was gone. He thought about his own past, his sister, his parents, all taken during the Terran raids. He had never talked about it, but tonight felt different. "My family died in the war," he said quietly. Zira turned her head slightly, listening. "I was a soldier once." "Just a number." He smiled bitterly. "I came home to no home." Zira reached out, touched his hand gently. Her fingers were soft, warm, strong. despite all she had suffered. In that moment, no words were needed. Two broken souls, sitting in a haunted forest, somehow finding comfort in each other's silence. Later that night, something strange happened. The trees began to glow brighter, and the wind carried whispers. Not in any known language, but ancient and deep. Zero sat up straight, alert, her eyes wide. She whispered, "Spirits. Watchers." Jaren grabbed his blaster out of habit, but Zero placed her hand on it. "No harm," she said. They test. Suddenly, the forest lit up like dawn, but the sky was still dark. From the trees, shapes began to form, tall, glowing beings. Not solid, not spirit, something in between. They moved slowly, surrounding the cave. Watching, not speaking. Zero stood up and walked toward them, barefoot and calm. Jaren stood too, ready to protect. But Zero looked back and said, "Wait." She stepped into the circle of light, and the glowing shapes bowed slightly. One of them floated closer and placed its hand near her heart. Zero closed her eyes, breathing slowly. When she opened them again, her eyes were glowing, not with fear, but with something ancient. Power. The shapes vanished, melting into the trees like mist. Zero turned and walked back to Jaren, her voice calm. "They know. We are not enemy." Jaren stared at her. "What just happened?" She looked up at the stars. "They remember me." "My blood," he understood. Slowly. Zero was not just a victim, not just a mother on the run. She was connected to something greater, something old and powerful. She belonged to a line the forest still respected. That night, the forest stayed quiet, as if guarding them. And Jaren realized something important. He didn't just save her. He had found someone stronger than he could ever imagine. Not a broken slave, but a queen in hiding. He looked at the sleeping children, then at Zero. They were no longer just passengers on his ship. They were his people now, and whatever ghosts lived in the forest, they had given him a message too. Protect her, or lose everything. The days passed slowly in the forest. The ship was hidden under a thick blanket of vines, impossible to spot from above. Jaren built a small shelter from fallen trees, while Zero taught her children how to find food among the glowing plants. The forest had accepted them, but peace was never meant to last. Far above the planet, a black ship floated in orbit, silent and cold. Inside, bounty hunter Treg watched the heat signatures on his screen. He had tracked the stolen cargo for days, a painted breeder and her young. The others had failed, but he never did. "Forest or not," he growled, "I'll drag her out by her hair." Back on the forest floor, Jaren noticed something. Strange birds that used to sing were now silent. The glowing bugs had disappeared. And the trees, they seemed tense, as if holding their breath. That night, he checked the sky with his old scope. Our ship was there, high up, watching, waiting. He ran to Zira, who stood by the fire with her arms around her children. "They found us," he whispered. Zero didn't look surprised. Instead, she closed her eyes, placed her hand on the dirt, and whispered words in her old tongue. The ground trembled, just a little. Then she looked at Jaren. "We don't run." This time, Jaren wanted to argue, but something in her voice made him stop. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hiding anymore. When the hunters came, they came fast. Dropships cut through the clouds and landed in a circle around the forest. Armed men and machines stomped through the trees, burning anything that moved. They shouted for her by name, laughing, "Come out, Zira. Your price just went up." Zira stepped out of the cave. Alone, her children behind her, Jaren rushed too. Her side with a blaster, but she held up her hand. "No," she said. "This is not your fight. This is mine." The trees around them began to glow brighter. The ground rumbled again. Louder now, and then it happened. Zero opened her arms, tilted her head back, and screamed. But it wasn't a cry of fear. It was the voice of a queen, of a mother, of a survivor. The wind howled with her scream. Vines snapped out of the soil and wrapped around enemy boots. Pulling them into the ground, roots rose like snakes, knocking down armored men and smashing their weapons. The forest itself had awakened, not as a place, but as a protector. Jaren stood frozen, watching her eyes glow golden, her body surrounded by swirling energy. This wasn't the Zero he had found in chains. This was a force, ancient and unstoppable. The bounty hunters fired at her, but the bullets never reached. The trees shifted and moved, catching them mid-air and swallowing them whole. One man screamed as roots pulled him into the earth. Another tried to run but tripped over a living branch. Treg, the leader, watched from above, shaking with rage. "This isn't possible," he shouted. "She's just a slave." But his fear grew as he saw what was really happening. She wasn't a slave. She was royalty, a warrior with the forest as her army. Jaren finally moved, grabbing one of the injured hunters and dragging him away from Zira's fury. "Don't kill him," he said softly. "Please." Zira paused, her breathing heavy, her face shining with sweat and power. She nodded, and the roots loosened, dropping the man onto the dirt. The battle ended in minutes. Smoke rose from fallen machines and silence returned. Zira fell to her knees, drained. Jaren rushed to catch her. She leaned into his arms, trembling. "I had to," she whispered. "They would take them." "You were amazing," Jaren said, holding her close. "I was afraid," she replied. "But not for me." The children ran to them and wrapped their arms around their mother. The forest glowed softly once again. A strange peace settled over them, deeper than before. It was not the peace of hiding. It was the peace of victory. Later that night, Zira sat by the fire, her children asleep in her lap. Jaren sat across from her, tired but proud. "Why didn't you tell me you could do that?" he asked. She looked at him quietly, then said, "Because I didn't believe I could." "Not until now," he smiled. "You're not just a mother." She nodded. "I am more." "But they made me forget." "Not anymore," Jaren said. "You're reminded." Everyone, and above them, in the sky that once hunted her. The stars looked different now. They weren't watching in silence. They were shining in respect. The fire had died to glowing embers. Ash floated gently through the forest air like forgotten snowflakes. Zira sat on a rock, her children asleep beside her, and her body sore from the battle. But her heart felt strange, not broken, not heavy. It felt alive. Jaren walked back from the crashed enemy pod, carrying a bag of supplies. He was bruised, limping slightly, but smiling. "I found their unit," he said. "I smashed it." Zira looked at him, her lips forming a tired smile. "No more trackers," she whispered. They had one, but more than that, they had changed. Jaren was no longer a lone drifter, and Zira was no longer a prisoner. The days that followed, they stayed hidden in the forest. The trees had accepted them, and even the animals moved gently around their camp. Jaren built new walls from wood and vines, a real shelter, not just a hiding spot. Zira painted symbols on the cave with crushed leaves and glowing dust. Symbols from her world, her history, her bloodline. One night, the children asked Jaren to tell them a story. He sat beside them and began talking about Earth, about warm rain, blue skies, and dogs that chased their tails. Zira listened quietly, her head resting against the cave wall. She had never seen his world, but through his voice, she could picture it. And for the first time, she imagined something else, a future. Later, when the children slept, Zira touched Jaren's hand. "Why?" she asked softly. He looked at her, confused. "Why you take me from auction?" Jaren took a breath, then said, "I don't know. Maybe I saw something in your eyes." She smiled gently. "You saw nothing. I was empty." "No," he replied, shaking his head. "You were waiting for someone to see you." There was a long silence between them, full of soft wind and quiet breathing. Then Zira said something Jaren didn't expect. "In my tongue, I have no name now." Jaren looked at her. "Why?" she answered. "When we are taken, we are stripped of name, of past. Only number remains." Jaren stood and walked into the ship. Returning with a metal plate, he placed it in her hands. "I made this," he said. "It's not from Earth or Zenthara. It's from here." On the plate was a symbol, a mix of two worlds, his alphabet and hers. Together they spelled Zira na Zira. Reborn, she stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Sarana." She repeated it like a song. Over and over. It wasn't just a name, it was a beginning. They decided to leave the forest after one more moon passed. The children had grown stronger, happier. Jaren had finished repairing the ship. Adding parts taken from the bounty pod, Zira stood at the edge of the trees, barefoot in the dirt, whispering thanks to the spirits. They took off quietly, the ship rising like a leaf in the wind. This time, they had a destination, a secret world Jaren had heard about from old smugglers. A planet called Haven Reach, where no law touched and families built new lives. The flight took 2 days. During that time, Zero taught the children how to write their names. Jaren showed them how to fly the ship, letting them press harmless buttons while laughing. And every night, Zira and Jaren sat side by side. Closer than before, she no longer looked like a painted statue. Her skin was clean, glowing with natural color, her eyes full of strength. Jaren saw her not as someone he saved, but someone he needed, someone who made his empty ship feel like home. When they reached Haven Reach, a soft blue world with mountains and rivers, they were welcomed not as strangers, not as refugees, but as settlers. Jaren traded parts for land. They built a small house near the river, where trees bent like boughs to the wind. Zero planted seeds from the forest moon, and they grew fast. The children joined a small school with other alien kids. Jaren found work fixing ships, while Zero helped new arrivals find shelter. One evening, a group of refugees arrived, frightened and cold. Zero wrapped a blanket around a crying girl and whispered, "You are not broken." The girl looked up, confused. Zero smiled and added, "You are waiting to be seen." Jaren stood behind her, holding her hand. They were no longer running. They were rebuilding, and every time someone asked her name, she didn't say slave or breeder or auction girl. She lifted her chin proudly and answered, "Zarana, of Haven Reach." Years passed quietly on Haven Reach. The stars changed positions in the sky, but peace remained. The river near their home sang a soft song every morning, and the wind through the trees whispered old memories for the first time in her life. Zarana felt what she once believed was impossible: safety. Her children grew tall and strong, their skin glowing with health, their laughter echoing through the green hills. They learned both languages, their mother's deep, lyrical tongue and Jaren's soft earth words. They weren't just survivors, they were becoming something more. Something new. Zero worked with other women, teaching them how to grow food, how to build homes from forest stone and living wood. Many of these women were like her, rescued, forgotten, lost. But when they saw Zarana, they saw hope. A mother, a fighter, a queen who had once been painted for sale. Jaren's hands became rough with work, but his smile never faded. He fixed broken engines, delivered supplies, and always returned home before dark. And every evening, without fail, he sat beside Zira under the stars, their hands touching, words not always needed. Because some things were felt more than said. One day, the children came running with news. A new ship is landing strangers. Zira stood quickly, her heart thudding, not fear this time, but memory. At the village edge, a cargo vessel touched down, covered in rust and dust. From it stepped a girl, thin, shaking, holding a baby in her arms. The crowd watched her with silence and suspicion, but Zero stepped forward. no hesitation. She took off her shawl and wrapped it around the girl's shoulders. The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she whispered. Zira smiled gently. "'Cause someone once wrapped me in warmth when I was nothing but fear." Jaren came beside her and helped carry the baby. Later that night, he looked at Zira by the fire and said, "This is who we are now." She nodded, a place for the broken who want to become whole again. Word spread beyond Haven Reach. Stories of the human who bought a painted slave but never touched her, who instead raised her like a queen and fathered her children. With love. Not blood, more ships came. Not to take, but to join, each person carrying pain. Each one leaving with hope. Zira's daughter became a healer. Her son, a scout, who helped guide travelers through the jungle paths, and Jaren. He became a symbol. The man who saw a soul where others saw a price tag. People asked him often, "Why did you choose her?" He always answered the same way, "I didn't choose her. I heard her heart calling, even when she was silent." One night, under a sky full of shooting stars, the village held a feast. Zira wore a crown made of glowing forest vines, her children. Dancing around her, Jaren stood beside her. Older now, his eyes full of stories. A boy asked her, "Is it true they tried to sell you like a pet?" Zira knelt down, smiled, and said, "Yes, but they didn't know I was royalty, and the man who bought you. He didn't buy me to own me," she said, looking up at Jaren. "He rescued me to love me, and I built a world with him." The fire cracked, the drums played, and the stars watched silently. Because this was no longer a story of pain. It was a story of power. Not the power to hurt, but the power to heal. And in that village, built by kindness, ruled by no flag. They wrote her name on a stone at the village center. Zira, the mother who rose from chains. And beside it, another name. Jaren, the man who chose to see. Together, they didn't just escape the past, they created a future. Not just for themselves, but for all those who believed they were too broken to be loved. And every child born on Haven Reach knew their story. Not as legend, but as truth. Because love, when given freely, can turn even a slave into a queen, and even a wanderer into a father.